This morning's reading is a Bible passage from the Song of Solomon, chapter 8, verse 5. Set me as a seal upon your heart, as a seal upon your arm, for love is strong as death, passion fierce as the grave. Its flashes are flashes of fire, a raging flame. Many waters cannot quench love, neither can floods drown it. If one offered for love all the wealth of one's house, it would be utterly scorned. So ends the reading. Esther Perel's parents met one another for the first time on the road on the day of liberation from both their respective concentration camps. What does it mean to fall in love in the concentration camp? They spent the first 5 years of their relationship as illegal refugees in Belgium before they were finally allowed to stay. I just wonder, in the midst of this daily trauma of captivity and degradation, how could you humanize yourself and experience feelings you are not meant to feel when you are treated like an animal? Esther's father would always say if there had been no war, no Holocaust, he would never have married this woman. This was how they made meaning out of the horrors they had endured. He adored her and looked up to her, and she loved being adored. Their marriage was about savoring the beauty and rapture of life. Their house was alive with dancing, singing, families, and feasts. When they argued, she would amplify and he would minimize. The petty arguments did not get very far. If she became too frustrated with him, he would go to her, give her a kiss, and ask, "Is this worth it?" They had been through so much. Keep perspective. After all we have survived, are we really going to fight? Is this worth it? It was around quarantine day number 184 that I knew I wanted to preach about relationships during the pandemic. I brought my husband to lead music with me so none of you would get too worried about us, even as I may say some things that challenge us. Relationships in COVID-19 are under environmental stress. That is for sure. We will not cover all kinds of relationships in all of their various stages in one sermon. I hope to give voice to one particular way our relationships are under stress, and hopefully offer a lamplight for the shadowed path before you, and maybe even a revelation for the way you came to be here. You don't have to keep your mask on. We begin not with the dishes or who last spoke with sarcastic disgust about the other's habits, but with the oldest story in the oldest book of humankind. Set me as a seal upon your heart, as a seal upon your arm, for love is strong as death, passion fierce as the grave. Its flashes are flashes of fire, a raging flame. But every fire needs air to burn. Our relationships, they're just not getting enough air these days. One thing to understand about me and Bible literacy is that I never really read the Bible, growing up UU, until seminary. And my Old Testament class in seminary began with this book, the Song of Solomon, or as some call it, the Song of Songs. because many scholars believe it is the oldest book based on ancient Egyptian love poetry. The door through which a person enters the Bible is deeply significant to their relationship with the text. The door through which I entered the Bible was a seductive, sensuous love song, a couple's ode to the erotic. This has affected my relationship with Scripture ever since every other passage came to me in direct response to this one that claims a passion as fierce as the grave. This is why I view the Bible as a story of humanity, an attempt at capturing all of human experience across time and space, and an invitation to reverence for it all. Though the church fathers may have tried to shift the narrative around, the Song of Solomon remained, stood the test of time. It's still in there, demanding reverence for erotic power as a source of strategy, of wisdom and joy during times of deep human suffering and oppression. So it is still speaking to us across the ages to remind us that our bodies are a testament to creation. As long as we are alive, we have access to the depth and breadth of erotic power as a sacred source of survival. And no one has written as evocatively about honoring erotic power than Audre Lorde, a Black lesbian poet and writer who wrote most of her work on the heels of the feminist movement of the 70s and 80s, and whose writing influenced me deeply as a young woman. She writes, "The very word erotic comes from the Greek word eros, the personification of love in all its aspects, born of chaos and personifying creative power and harmony. When I speak of the erotic then," she writes, "I speak of it as an assertion of the life force of women, of that creative energy empowered, the knowledge and use of which we are now reclaiming in our language, our history, our dancing, our loving, our work, our lives." So those lovers in ancient Egypt, whose love was inscribed in the Song of Solomon tablets, they made love in gardens of delights. They wandered the garden in the sunshine. In truth, it reads, if you really read the Song of Songs, it reads like an illicit affair, unleashing desire with abandon. Now, I don't know about you, but my wedding vows did not say, in quarantine. I would love to, yeah, it's fine. Back to our wedding vows. And what they didn't say, they did not say in quarantine and captivity and day in and day out in 24 hours, 7 days a week with no visitors nor gatherings. And I don't think yours did either, if you did wedding vows. Whomever you are trapped with for the long haul of this pandemic, I hope you are finding moments of escape to get some air into that fire. I hope you are finding ways to establish boundaries around the self, and you are finding ways to connect to your own erotic power, even with all of this stress, with all of this loss, everything going on. We need it. We need that connection. In addition to the relentlessness of our personalities and all of our habits now with no escape in quarantine or sheltering in place, this is all so difficult for so many reasons. One reason is we often regulate our own anxiety off of our partners, relying on them to soothe us. And so now we are caught in a web of mutual anxiety with no escape. Relationships often find a pattern of closeness and distance naturally, We live in a culture that may fetishize togetherness and sameness, but in the real world, relationships are more like a square dance or an accordion. They come together and pull apart. And in pre-COVID times, we may have enjoyed more distance in our relationship, and now we wonder why things are so stressful at home when we're spending more time cooped up. It's because the reality is our relationships need distance. That reality is not being honored. It's because the wider culture asks us to believe that being smushed together is what true love looks like. Perhaps in your close proximity to one another, you have noticed yourselves falling into unhealthy patterns. Esther Perel, whose parents met on a concentration camp Liberation Day, well, she is now a best-selling author, psychologist, and relationship expert. She writes about liberating desire and erotic power in long-term relationships. She writes of 4 types of relationship bad habits. You may recognize this as I say it. So there's picking, bickering. Maybe you call it bickering. Maybe you find yourselves bickering and picking at one another. She calls this chronic, low-intensity warfare. Instead of saying, I would like a cup of water, you might say, why did you take that water for yourself? What about me? So there's the difference. And Perel reminds us behind every criticism is a wish. Now, this may be a relationship pattern of the last 6 months or the past 40 years. But it is not too late to deepen self-awareness, to use I statements, sticking to your desire for a glass of water rather than their lack of psychic ability to get you one. So that's one. She also talks about kitchen sinking. This is rough because I think this is me. Kitchen sinking, when you pile everything into the argument, so you lose track of the original conflict. The argument now becomes this impossible task. Maybe it was just about the dishes, but now it's about a million other things. And now in order to get through this moment, all these other issues that were piled on top must now somehow be resolved. Yet they cannot be resolved in this moment at all. Kitchen sinking, she calls that. And then the next one, confirmation bias. Now that I've decided my partner is a slob who doesn't care what the house looks like, I look for it. We develop a radar to confirm our bias. We also disregard all evidence that may prove the opposite. We start to keep a scoreboard. Does this sound familiar? And finally, she talks about fundamental attribution error. If I am late, it is because of traffic. If you are late, it is because your character is as a disorganized slob. My lateness is circumstance. Your lateness is character. That is fundamental attribution error. And that is a big issue in our relationships, a big negative pattern. These dynamics loom even larger now in captivity. Esther Perel has a book, Mating in Captivity, that is not at all about a relationship in quarantine. It's just about the captivity of a monogamous, long relationship. But I think the title definitely applies to this moment we are in. So, it's okay to fight. It's okay to have these negative behavior patterns and to have disharmony, but we must repair if the relationship is to survive. You don't have to agree with each other, but you do have to acknowledge the other person has a right to their perspective. The question is, can we fight better? A bad fight is really a negative escalation of attack, blame, defend. How do you turn it around after maybe years, or at least these months in quarantine, so people can hear each other? Can you imagine that this person so close to you might actually have a completely different experience of what just happened? Can you make room for that? Talk about what you feel rather than what the other person did or did not do. I can hear you and still agree with you and find a way forward. Did you know that in conflict, in moments of intense conflict, we have 10 seconds, which is about 3 sentences before our brain goes into self-defense and prepares a rebuttal? So that means that we have to move from reacting to reflective listening. Maybe you say something that does validate them. I don't think I could have done what you say, but I see how you experienced. I don't think I have done this, but I see how you experienced it this way. So, Esther Perel recommends, in order to get from the intense moment of conflict to a moment of repair, she recommends the cool off. Take 20 minutes. Maybe say, I am not able to give justice to this conversation right now, and I need to go cool off. Now, the other person must also respect that cool off period and not try and follow them out the room and continue the bickering, continue the conflict. Everyone has to agree to the cool off. And then you might be able to see what your ultimate desire is, your wish for that moment. Not necessarily to control them, but what do you really want? She suggests that we find a way to return after that 20 minutes and to apologize, or to take accountability at least for taking responsibility for what you did without shame, and that is difficult. Self-esteem is really the ability to see yourself as a flawed person and still hold yourself in high regard. This is so difficult in our relationships that are lifelong. So cool off and then come back to apologize. She also recommends maybe writing a reflective letter with some accountability, or maybe text message or email. Some brilliant colleagues of mine, Reverend Jake Morrill and Reverend Laura Bogle, recently taught a workshop on this exact topic of the strain that relationships are under during COVID-19. And they applied appreciative inquiry to relationships in quarantine. Now, appreciative inquiry is a strengths-based process used in organizational development. It's something that we are going to use together at UUCA when we do our strategic planning and visioning work later this year. Instead of focusing on problems to fix, appreciative inquiry surfaces and names strengths to augment. In a relationship, it can be so easy to fall into critical mode, noticing all the flaws and disappointments and shortcomings of the relationship. Sometimes it can take extra effort to notice and then celebrate and then extend the strengths. So, I want to invite you to just think for a moment, to engage in some questions, just to think reflectively on these questions. One question. During COVID-19, when was a time when you noticed your partner rising to the challenge? What were they doing? And what happened because of it? When did you notice your partner rising to the challenge? And if you are not in a relationship like this, you can think of another person in your life who you are in relationship with, a family member or close friend. And maybe you've been struggling too during this stressful time. So when was a time when you noticed them rising to the challenge of this moment? What were they doing? And what happened because of it? Just think reflectively about that for a moment. The second question, despite the stress and disruption of COVID-19, what are 3 blessings you have noticed in your household? How do you think that you yourself may have contributed to this? to these? And how did your partner contribute to them? So again, 3 blessings as a result of this moment, COVID-19, 3 blessings, not a result of it, but 3 blessings that have happened in your household, in your relationship, in your life with this person. And how do you think you may have contributed to those 3 blessings? And how did they? That's all. There are a lot more questions. I'm kind of interested in leading a workshop about this myself, or maybe writing a blog post about it. But for now, let's just look at these 2 questions. I know not every relationship can withstand the weight of a pandemic, and not every relationship should. But maybe this will bring some peace to your days, some harmony to your home, to have an approach to recognize some of the patterns, and then again, to find a way to escape to yourself, reconnecting with your own erotic power, your own vibrance. Maybe it's taking a walk or a run every day, or spending some time alone at a park with a book. Maybe it's online yoga with Adrian, or recognizing that the reason you are booking so many tea times at the golf course is because you need some absence for the heart to grow fonder. Try to recognize the negative patterns as they are happening. This one is tough. Just giving them language, though, can be so helpful. You're picking again. Kitchen sink arguing. Confirmation bias. I knew you would do this. My radar told me you were a hopeless case. Fundamental attribution bias. My problem is circumstantial. Your problem is character. No, that's not true. That's fundamental attribution bias. Recognize that bias when it happens. If you notice yourself falling into these patterns, take a cool-off period. Notice that you may not be doing that discussion justice, and take a 20-minute break. Get clear on your own needs and desires. Apologize for your role in the escalation. Appreciate each other. Offer gratitude. Is this really worth it? We will forget to do these things. We will raise our voices again when we didn't mean to. Disharmony and argument is fine, it's natural. It's the repair that matters. Maybe it is not too much to ask that we give some energy to our erotic power, even during a health crisis, a racial justice crisis, a political and economic crisis, yes, even then. Where can you go to fill that well, to connect with your own erotic power and that is so generative, that how you know you're alive. It's how you know you're alive. Maybe our erotic power will give us the creativity to make it through this time with our relationships intact as a source of love, comfort, and liberation. Maybe we can draw strength from that first biblical couple with no name, whose love poem to one another survived 2 millennia, feasts and famine, pandemics and progress, holocausts and oppressions across human history. What are those 2 telling us now? Set me as a seal upon your heart, as a seal upon your arm, for love is as strong as death. Passion, fierce as the grave. Its flashes are flashes of fire, a raging flame. May it be so with you. Amen. Blessed be.